Once I had a job and had enough money and decided I wanted to start a band, I went and bought the cheapest drum set I could.
Hello and welcome to Where the Living Room Used to Be, a podcast about Rhode Island's music scene. Hey everyone, it's James. On this episode, I get to sit with Paul Dechichio, a bit of a punk rock renaissance man here in Providence. He's been running Tor Johnson Records for over 17 years, has owned a record store in the city, booked hundreds of shows, played in several recognized bands, and is a part owner of Teeth Like Swords print shop. We talk about how Tor Johnson Records and Squid Art Collective got their start, his thoughts on the importance of record stores in a place like AS220, and what DIY shows have meant for him. This was really cool to do, so please check them out. I've got some links in the episode description, as well as the song listings for you all. Enjoy, and as always, please subscribe and follow along on Facebook and Instagram at Living Room UTB for pictures, show flyers, and more from our interview. Thanks for doing this, Paul. Appreciate taking some time to talk about some music.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so to get things started, can you talk a little bit about where you grew up and your introduction to music?
Sure. I grew up just south of Boston in a suburb called Randolph, and my parents both had musical history. They were in choir in Northeastern. My dad played clarinet and my mom played piano. Neither one of them was music wasn't super prevalent in the house. We had a record player in the basement, but otherwise it was mostly the radio.
Okay.
While I was growing up.
Yeah.
In whatever grade it is that you pick an instrument, I really wanted to play drums, and my parents really didn't want drums in the house.
Yeah.
So I started playing saxophone and got into jazz and things like that.
Oh, nice.
And it wasn't really until high school when, I started buying more music for myself.
Okay.
Had a
first
job.
Record you bought?
Well, the first recorded music I bought was a CD of Boyz II Men 2.
All right.
That was definitely the first thing that I bought with my own money. But one of the first actual records I bought was the special self-titled record. But yeah, it was once I finally started getting into more of that style music and decided I wanted to
Were you into ska a lot? Were you
late
punk at all, or
late 90s, ska was your gateway drug.
Yeah.
95, 96.
Yeah.
And being in Boston, where the Bosstones were from,
Mm-hmm.
and ska was definitely your gateway drug.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with going to ska shows.
Okay.
And then from seeing flyers and whatever, started going to more street punk, punk Mohawk style shows.
Okay.
And then from there into hardcore, 10-Yard Fight sort of stuff.
Okay.
And then from there into more indie rock, Texas the Reason, Garrison sort of stuff.
Cool. Do you remember your first show then?
First concert I ever went to on my own was Smashing Pumpkins on the Melancholy tour.
Okay.
So it was them and Garbage.
Yeah.
At now it's TD Garden or whatever. It's Boston.
Yeah.
It's Boston Garden.
Yeah.
It was Boston Garden at the point in time.
The Garden.
Come on, the Garden. So that was the first concert.
Yeah.
And then first show. For me, the difference is a concert has seats.
Okay.
Okay. And a show probably doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's really a odd distinction, but it just works in my brain.
Yeah, it's what works for you.
Yeah. So the first show was a Fork in Hand Records showcase, which, if you're unfamiliar with that was the record label that Big D and the Kids Table owned.
Okay.
And it was in the basement of Emerson College.
Yeah.
And it was Big D and the Kids Table, Kicked in the Head, the Sellouts, probably Drexel. It was all the bands that were on that label.
Yeah. Do you remember your first like Rhode Island concert show or?
Man, that is tough because the first year when I moved here for college, I went to like every show. I did as much as humanly possible because, for multiple reasons. Reason one, you're out of your parents' roof. Living in a dorm that I didn't want to be in because it was like 2 bunk beds, so it's me and like 3 dudes living in a room.
Yeah.
So anytime I could not be in that dorm room was a positive.
Okay.
So many shows. Like I feel like Advocate probably played the Met once a month, and I went to like almost all of them. I saw Lightning Bolt at like the Safari Lounge, and the Jazz June played at the Met to like literally 5 people on like a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
In like the winter.
Okay.
And I went to Johnson & Wales and lived down on the culinary campus, which is like further out of
the
town.
harbor side one, right?
Right. Yeah. But they have a shuttle that goes right downtown.
Okay.
And it dropped you off like at the time, basically a block away from Safari Lounge, like 3 blocks away from the Met. It dropped you off right on that main campus.
Bows and everything.
Exactly. So I would just take that shuttle, and because it was free, and it ran until like 3 a.m, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And the idea probably was that you as a student were probably expected to get a job in a restaurant, and restaurants are open late, so you take the shuttle home.
Yeah.
I was working too, but I was just going to as many shows as humanly possible.
Okay.
So they all kind of blend together.
Were you familiar with these bands prior to going, or were you just like, I'm going to this club and whoever's playing is playing, and discovering bands that way? Like, are there
a little from column A and a little from column B.
Okay.
My parents, when I got my license, were very adamant about not going over state lines to go to shows. Like they were okay with me going to concerts, but like not traveling that far.
Okay.
So a lot of the names I would see on flyers of Boston bands when they would play Providence. So I wouldn't necessarily go to that show, but I might have seen the name and be like, oh, they played with this band, so I'll probably like them because I like this band.
Yeah.
So it started out that way. Like there were wires from Boston whenever they played down here would play with Advocate or play with probably like 4 Horse maybe was going on at that point in time, like bands that would play down here often. And so I'd see the name and be like, I'll go to this show. I recognize that name, and then learn more bands because of that, because of who else was on the bill.
Okay. What was the first band that you played in?
Once I had a job and had enough money and decided I wanted to start a band, I went and bought the cheapest drum set I could.
Okay.
And the first band I was in was called Defenestration. I can't listen to it. I have trouble listening to a lot of my bands later, like going back and listening to.
Okay.
Because I don't know, I pick it apart.
What kind of music was it?
You could.
What were the influences?
Sum it up as like an indie rockish band. Like a lot of the other guys were listening to a lot of like, the first Hot Water Music record, the first like couple Braid records, Boy Sets Fire, stuff like that. Our guitarist was pretty classically trained, so like there'd be a lot of jazz influence in it. It was interesting.
Yeah.
Like it was a weird amalgamation of a lot of sounds.
Yeah. Do you remember the first band you played in Rhode Island?
The first band I played in Rhode Island was called Matches and Heroin, which is taken from a Stephen King short story.
Okay.
That band evolved a lot. Like we went through a couple different singers. In the end, we like had a piano in it, and same sort of thing. It was like just a loosely rock-based, like indie rock-based, but like drew from a lot of different influences.
Okay.
The singer in the end was also like is a real singer. Like wasn't screaming, wasn't like yelling. Like it was a very interesting band.
Okay. And how soon after you had moved down here for school did you start that?
when I first moved here, I still had a band in Boston and like kept traveling up there for a lot of shows as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then those bands broke up around the same time that I started booking shows under the Tor Johnson Records moniker and like started the label. And I kind of started the label because I didn't have a band.
Okay.
And I felt like I wanted to actively participate within the scene more.
Mm-hmm.
And so Matches and Heroin probably didn't start until probably 03, because I think we lasted until like 05. Something in that range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you talk more about Tor Johnson Records and how that started? And
Sure. Yeah. So Tor Johnson Records came out of me being 20 years old, wanting to be an active participant within the music scene here in Providence. Like, sort of up until that point when I moved here in 2000, so those first 2 years, I was very split between the scene that I had grown accustomed to in Boston and the new scene that I was sort of thrusting myself into here.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really a conscious effort to push myself more into the Providence scene.
Okay.
I used to book shows like outside of Boston in the suburbs, and still was when I was still living here. And so this was like a way for me to book shows here. It was a way for me to really just become more of a part of what was going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And I could have easily just started booking shows without a name, but I did want to. It was interesting to me to start to put out records.
Okay.
So it was sort of it started out as like, I'd like to eventually do this. I should come up with a thing now, so that way when I book shows, I can like attach the name onto it, so that way when like a record comes out, it like has already existed, like in my brain.
Yeah. So you were booking shows under the Tor Johnson name before you would put records out? Is that where you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. There was talk and ideas of records, but it was I think the third show that I booked under the moniker had all three of the bands that ended up being on the first release play that show, and like talking to them there was kind of how we decided on that first release.
Okay. Do you remember where that show was?
Sure. I used to book at those first couple shows were at the Knights of Columbus in Warwick. That was down by like Hendricken.
Okay.
I, even outside of Boston, was very involved in more of the DIY scene.
Yeah.
Rent a hall, put on a show, go to Daddy's Junkie Music, rent a PA, like, and while I went to shows in clubs and real venues, I never booked one there at that point in time.
Okay.
So if you go to the Tor Johnson Records website, under the shows category, there's a past shows that goes all the way back to 2002 with the very first show we ever booked.
That's awesome.
And it catalogs every single show we ever booked. And it is a long time before we actually have a show in a real venue.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a long time. We booked a bunch of shows or I'd say it was me. I booked shows at that Knights of Columbus in Warwick, and then at the Rumford VFW, and then at like the Smith Street in Providence VFW, and like I opened the yellow pages to the VFW section and just started calling VFWs, because that's what else am I going to do? In 2002, like the internet isn't really what it is now. Like that's what I'm doing. I tried like basically most of the Providence ones first. Yeah. And every single one was like, nah, man, we've had shows. That's a bad idea. I'm not going to do that. Like, how much stuff got broken? This, that, or the next thing. Cause that's the problem you run into, is like people who are irresponsible, like went in and ruined it. That's what ended up happening with the Smith Street VFW, is they stopped doing all shows because my shows went so well that then they started letting other people book shows, and then those people ruined it. The Providence Turners was the same way. Like, I used to book shows there, and so eventually this one in like Warwick way out at, like by Hendricken, and like they were like, yeah, right, sure, it's $150 or whatever.
Yeah, okay.
I'm like, all right, cool, sounds good.
How was the scene back then? Were there a lot of people going to these shows?
It depends on the show you booked.
Okay.
The suburban shows that I was booking were not super well attended.
Okay.
Like, I was happy when 20 kids showed up.
Mm-hmm.
When I eventually was able to get into Providence, into the Smith Street American Legion, and some of the Providence Turner shows, definitely more kids would show up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that is that at the time, Providence proper was a very bike-centric city.
Oh, okay.
And so a lot of people might not have actually had cars.
Mm-hmm.
So getting out to the suburbs was a task. So I would book bands that were from Warwick, or like had kids that like lived in that area or South County, hoping that like then that would draw people a little bit more as well.
Oh, okay. What was the first release you put out with Tor Johnson?
The first release was a Gorilla Biscuits tribute 7-inch with a band from Providence, a band from Taunton area, and a band from Connecticut.
What were the bands?
Closer Than Kin from Taunton, Citizens Unrest they were from Warwick at the time, but Providence, and then For All It's Worth from Connecticut.
I don't like it! Why is it like this? Tear friends apart! Come on! The love of God, this is what you are! We were still together, because I'm working hard! You see the good in everyone, see that doesn't prove besides lifestyle that you like, but they're just a crap!
How frequently were you putting out records in those early days? Like, did you have this master plan, or was it just like, I like this band, I'm going to put something out?
Exactly. It was sort of by the seat of my pants. The first release came out in late 02, early 03, something like that. I want to say late 02. And then the next release didn't actually come out until, it was probably 8 or 10 months later. Mm-hmm. I mean, turnaround times at plants were not what they are now. So you could have a whole release in your hand in probably like 2 months.
Wow.
Yeah. The second and third release that were supposed to come out for the label never did. And that sort of like made, like I was concentrating on those. If you look at the Tor Johnson Records like discography, there is no TJR 002 or 03. It like jumps from 01 to 04.
Yeah.
And then I just never went in and filled in those blanks.
Were there like indie labels that were inspiration to you, or other like DIY labels that you were friends with that kind of taught you the ropes? Or
totally. At the time, there was a lot of stuff going on here in Providence. There was a record store called Contrast Records. Yeah. Al, that ran that record store, also had a label, and he was awesome. Like, I would go in there as like an 18-year-old kid, digging and like talking with him, and the amount that he helped me when I started was like huge. And I don't think he would ever even realize it, because it was just like, hey man, where do you get your records pressed?
Yeah.
Cool. Like, how do you even get them in stores? How do you even do that? Mm-hmm. Like, he helped out a lot. And then Mitch McCarter was running Trash Art, and I would talk with him a lot. Brian Oakley running Corleone. Mm-hmm. So there was a bunch of like labels, and like later on, as I established myself and started meeting more people, Ben from Load and Ben from Armageddon, and like eventually Brian from Atomic Action. But like he and I now are more like peers, because he was not doing his label when I was starting.
Okay.
He had like taken a break from the label. And then came back to it. So if it wasn't for Al being able to give me general guidelines, I like would have no idea what I was doing at all, like when I started.
How many records has Tor Johnson put out now? I mean, it's been, 17 years now then? Or?
17 years, yeah. So number 49, so minus those two that never came out, 47 releases.
Yep.
So 49 is at the plant right now.
Awesome. What's number 49? Can you put it out yet?
It's a band called Sneeze from Boston. It's their third LP called Finn. And
Cool.
if everything plays out correctly, that'll be out in the fall.
Nice. Yeah. And what kind of music is that?
They're kind of like garage rock.
Nice.
But they're guys who used to be in like screamo bands, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of got a little edge. It's definitely fuzzier than a lot of stuff.
Cool. And I know you've worked with a lot of Rhode Island bands. Can you talk about some of the Rhode Island bands that you've put out?
Sure. I mean, for me, one of the main things that really gets me to put out a record is probably your live show.
Mm-hmm.
And so, therefore, I work with local bands because they're who I end up seeing and liking. Recently, did an LP for Twin Foxes.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up, and this was partially because I helped run the space, but a lot of the bands from the Squid Amps practice space, which is was an art collective. So Weak Teeth and Blood Pheasant, older stuff, St. Jude, Another Dead Juliet.
What has been the biggest Tor Johnson Records release that you've put out?
Biggest in terms of selling?
Yeah.
The first Weak Teeth record sold out completely on my end in, I think, 4 months. We needed to do a repress.
Nice.
They were doing a lot of touring at that point in time. And so, yeah, we sold that the quickest and went into a second press. And now that second press is gone. It's completely sold out.
Oh, wow.
So that record has definitely been the biggest in terms of selling.
Cool. Yeah, Weak Teeth is a great band, so they deserve it. Check them out. What bands have you played in Rhode Island?
In Rhode Island, the first band was Matches and Heroin, which did nothing more than a demo that I did not actually put out. And I don't know, you can probably find it online. I haven't looked. I was in a band called Jesuscentric, which was a very tongue-in-cheek metal band.
Okay.
Kind of stoner rocky stuff. I was in kind of like a Sabbathy band called Alpha Owl. I know you mostly from a band I played in called Best Practices.
Yeah.
And you were playing in Cedros, and we used to play together a lot. We used to enjoy describing that as Drive Like Jehu on speed. I currently play in a band called Cyttorak, which is kind of a doomy sludge sort of band.
You just put out a cassette with them, right?
Yes, yeah. This is the second tape we've done, and it just came out a couple months ago, a month ago.
How many of your own bands have you put out on your label?
More than I wish.
Okay. Why do you say that?
So when I first started, that was a rule of mine.
Okay.
Was to not put out my own band, which is one of the reasons why Matches and Heroin didn't come out on the label. And a lot of it is because if I couldn't convince someone else to put out my band, why should I put it out? In my brain, it's if I'm not good enough to get someone else to do it, is it worth it for me to do it? I don't know. Keep in mind that at this point in time, I'm super early 20s, and bands that haven't really toured or left anywhere or done anything more than local shows. Jesuscentric ended up being an exception because at the time we were doing a lot of stuff. We were doing weekends. We had put out demo CDRs and sold them and sold merch and got asked to be on shows. And that record was recorded and it was so good, in my opinion, that I didn't really want to wait to try and pitch anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I just did it.
Okay.
And then that sort of broke the rule.
And then the box is open.
Exactly. Exactly.
But with the rise in digital music, how do you see that from a label? Like, do you think that people are looking for tangible music, that that people want to open something up, read liner notes, or like, are you seeing people buy just as much digital as they're buying records or tangible items from you?
I think that for the type of music that we do, people want a physical item.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that physical item is ever actually listened to, or whether someone takes the download code out and just downloads it,
mm-hmm.
is debatable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I think that people want to have a physical medium, a
mm-hmm.
physical something. I will always do a physical release.
Mm-hmm.
I will never do. I can't say never. As of right
Just
now,
like
I will.
put out your own band.
Yeah, right. As of right now, I will probably never put out strictly a digital record.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know, it defeats the purpose in my brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same reason I support still print medium, like zines.
Yep.
It's like, that's what a record label is in my brain.
Okay.
You create a thing. And for me, and for most of the bands on the label, physical is cake. Digital is icing. You know what I mean? Like, if someone downloads it off iTunes, awesome. That is great. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to sell records.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's extra for us, for like the label and for the bands.
Yeah.
It's nice and it's great, but like, it's not necessarily my focus.
Okay. One thing I find interesting, and shout out to the Modern Vinyl podcast. I remember hearing that you want to push people to record stores.
I feel like the record store is an integral part to the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if you are lucky enough to have a record store in your town or close enough to you, that you should be supporting them first before going straight to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is possibly an old school way of looking at things. It's possibly because of the fact that the label started at a time where web stores didn't really exist, that it's important to me to support, like I said, physical media, but also brick and mortar. You know, having owned a record store, it's important to make sure everybody gets a cut, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're unlucky enough to not have a record store near you, if you live somewhere where the only record store is one that has used Billy Joel records, and like the odds of you getting anything new from them doesn't exist, definitely support the label directly. If you're going to go to the internet, buy direct from the label. If you have the opportunity to walk into a place and buy the record, do that. And that's just making sure that that community space stays open, you know, because I feel like that's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, some of my best music memories are digging in a record store. Like, I find more interesting stuff that way than flipping through pages on a website. That said, go to the website and buy something. No,
yeah. Tor Johnson Records. Where can people buy Tor Johnson Records albums in Rhode Island?
Right now, Armageddon and Olympic have pretty much every release.
And what was the shop that you owned?
I owned a shop called Cathartic Records, which was in the Contrast space. I owned
That was
it
on Steeple Street,
yes,
right? Yeah,
5 Steeple Street on the 3rd floor, across the hall from Art Freak.
Yeah.
Before they moved. Upstairs from...
It's called where Art Freak used to be.
Yeah, excuse me, where Art Freak used to be, where Atlas Bauer Books used to be. Yeah, so it was, I owned it from 04 to 06. So Al closed Contrast, and then Quinn Murphy from Verse bought it and named it More Than Music, and very quickly realized that he couldn't be in a worldwide touring hardcore band and also run a record store.
Yeah.
And so I bought it a couple months later and opened Cathartic Records.
Okay. And what type of releases were you selling at the shop?
We were pretty much a hardcore and like indie rock store.
Okay.
That's what I was mostly listening to at that point in time. Also, Armageddon had just opened in, I think they opened in 01 or 02 at a Broadway location. So they had sort of solidified themselves as your punk metal, like grind crust store in Providence. Because, they're the guys from Drop Dead, and that's what they did. And at the time that they opened, Contrast was very much your hardcore, spot.
Yeah.
And so I sort of kept that going and made it. I sort of consciously made it so that if you came to my store, you would also want to go to Armageddon, maybe if you liked all sorts of music, and vice versa.
Oh, that's cool.
You know what I mean? It was kind of a conscious effort to not oversaturate Providence with just another record store. Like to sort of curate it a little bit more.
Yeah. We're here in Tor Johnson Records HQ. So I'll take some pictures and I'll post them, but it's basically like a record store down here.
So
has it always been like a record store?
No. My wife and I purchased a house about 2 years ago now. Every apartment we've ever lived in, and I started the label before meeting her, so including the apartment that I lived in prior to that, I'd always had access to the basement or worked out with the landlord to have access to the basement. So normally it was like a couple kind of crappy shelves and mostly boxes.
Yeah.
And when stuff would sell, I'd have to like dig through boxes. And for a long time now, probably the past 15, whenever I started a web store, so it was probably like 13 years ago at this point, I would do trades with other labels from around the world and really try to curate an actual online web store. And this was mostly after Cathartic Records closed. So I didn't have a physical store that I could curate. I decided to curate a online store. So there's always been not my stuff and then my stuff.
Oh, okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So normally the not my stuff would be the stuff on the shelf.
Yeah.
So I could keep them separate and like dig through it like when someone bought something. And then most of the Tor Johnson stuff was just in boxes.
Okay.
So when we bought this house, I really wanted to have a space that was set up like permanently that I could really organize correctly. And so I built these record shelves just from wood and purposefully built it so that there is like a record store top, like that you could like hypothetically dig through.
Yeah.
And
so they're all alphabetized.
Exactly. So all of that is the not my stuff. So all of that is other labels, is other bands that I've done trades with, or stuff that's on consignment in the web store, and so not Tor Johnson Records releases. And then all the underneath, the overstock, is Tor Johnson Records releases, organized by color and, I don't know, release.
You had briefly mentioned Squid Amps. Can you talk more about what that space was and what you guys did there? And
Sure. So while jesuscentric was going on, when we started, we were practicing in the basement of a house on Bath Street that Derek and Chris lived in. Derek and Chris were also in Yavin 5 at that point in time. They both ended up leaving that house, and Derek ended up leaving Yavin 5, and so we decided we needed a space. So we got word that this warehouse over on Harris Ave called the AJ Land Building had spaces. Called them up, checked out the space. It was awesome. We moved on in. Okay.
Was that with Tom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom's great. I saw him the other day.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But anyway, so we move into this space that used to be like a woodworker's space. It had all these weird cabinets like built into the wall. And I think, I'm trying to remember who else moved in when we moved in. I think Tabernacle did, who was like guys from Learn. And a friend of Chris's offered to do a mural on one of the walls because we were told we could paint any of the walls other than the brick. We were like, cool, let's get a really rad mural in. So this kid did a like mock-up of a bunch of Marshall amps with squid tentacles like swimming in like formation across the wall. And he did it on like a piece of paper and taped it to the wall. We were like, yeah, that's going to be great. Cut to maybe a month or two later, like not even, like we were not in there long. I had a show booked that was jesuscentric with In Black and White from Boston and Lost Hands Found Fingers from Cincinnati somewhere. I don't even remember where it was supposed to be booked. But 2 days before the show, they call me and say they accidentally double booked and my show's canceled. We decide to have it at the space.
Yeah.
Okay. Toss Tabernacle on it because they practice there anyway. Why not? We move all the stuff. This space is like, you've been there. It's like, it's
not. It's probably like 20, 30 feet by 10, 15 feet or something
like that.
Yeah.
Like, if 50 people could fit in there, it'd be packed. That's a if.
That's a big. That's
a big if. So we decided to move everything out and have the show there. Went great. Probably like, I don't know, maybe 20 kids showed up, maybe. But for that room, that felt big. We were able to pay both touring bands like $100.
Yep.
It was good. I get a call the next day. And at this point in time, by the way, so we did make a flyer with 2 days notice and spread it around everywhere. We decided to call the place Squid Amps. Based on the mural that supposedly at one point in time was going to be on this wall. Never ended up happening. Mural was never painted.
Do you have the piece of paper anywhere?
I don't know what happened to it either. Like, I'm kind of mad about
Frame
it.
that.
Right? So we decided to call it Squid Amps, have the show, goes great, goes perfectly, no problems. I get a call the next day from Tom, who runs the building, and he says, hey man, what's going on? Nothing. He's like, so, anything you need to tell me about? No? Don't think so? You have a show there last night? Maybe?
Yeah.
Come to find out, someone who was at the show called the number on the AJ Land building sign asking to rent a space to do shows like the one he went to last night.
Wow.
Yep. Don't know who this dude was. No clue who this guy was, but apparently he had such a fun time that he decided he wanted to rent a space to do the same thing.
and totally busted you.
Totally busted me. Ended up that Thomas was like really impressed about the way that we ran it, that we like made sure there was no trash anywhere, like that we really took care of the event, and proceeded to let me know that anytime we wanted to do more, to just give him a heads up.
Yeah.
Just let him know. Yeah, so that first show was in 2008. And Squid Amps stopped having shows in 2013, and I think when did everyone get kicked out? Like last year or the year before?
Yeah, it was probably, maybe like 2 years ago.
So probably 2017 was when they needed to do all the construction to that building, so all the bands got evicted. But we ended up not doing another show there for like 2 years almost, maybe like a year and a half.
After that first
show.
Yeah.
Reason being was that like it's a tiny room.
Yeah.
And it like if I was booking a show, I'd rather have it bigger, you know, and it wasn't until we sort of fostered that community there. You know, we were lucky enough that that space turned into something bigger than just a room in a warehouse. You know, a lot of the bands in there could be considered, I don't want to say fringe Providence bands, but they were bands that like were just doing whatever they wanted to do and didn't necessarily care if they were popular in town. You know, and it sort of fostered this community of artistic output that was in a bubble. And so we eventually started having the shows there that was just like, screw everywhere else. Like, I just want to hang out with my friends, play music, and have fun, and not need to worry about someone else's overhead.
Yeah.
You know? And
Or just even the draw of the show, you know, like if it was the 10 or 20 friends that you had, you were just hanging out, and it wasn't like
exactly, and you could
I
still
hope
pay
people show up to the show.
Right. Like, I've got to pay the room this, you know, like the sound guy that, and like it's just let's all just hang out, give whatever you can. The touring band make some money. None of the local bands really ever got paid. Honestly, like any local band that played Squid Amps was either a band from Squid Amps or a band we're friends with, and or a band from that building, and rarely, if ever, got paid because you knew that you were just going to have fun, and any money that came in should go to the band that needs to fill their gas tank.
Yeah.
You know, where when you play a venue, dependent on the venue and dependent on the show, there's kind of that expectation that you're just like, you know, I went out of my way and we did this thing. Like, you tossed me $20. Like, yes, and I agree that every band that plays a show should get money, local or otherwise, but the Squid Amp shows were more about the community, and like it didn't that part didn't matter as much.
Yeah. Where are you doing shows now?
I mostly do shows at AS220. I've fostered a really good relationship with them over the past like 3 bookers that have been there for the past probably 10 plus years. It's important to me to make sure that I still do stuff there because of the history attached to that business and to that place. But yeah, for the most part, I do shows there. I also do shows at Dusk, and then there's some other random places that, you know, if dates are taken.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like the AS220 is a place that doesn't get necessarily talked about enough. Where now that 242 Main and Burlington closed, AS220 is the oldest continually operating nonprofit all ages venue on the East Coast.
Wow.
They opened up something like 4 or 5 months before ABC No Rio in New York.
Okay.
The only one in the country that's older is Gilman Street. And I feel like AS220 doesn't necessarily get enough props for that from the community.
Yeah.
Like, they have supported the city. Like, there's all sorts of pros and cons attached to AS220 that we as local Providence people know. But on a whole, they as a company have supported the fringe elements of Providence continually. And so I feel like it's interesting where I've booked some out-of-state bands, like out-of-area bands, and tell them, oh yeah, I got the show at AS220, and they're like, whoa, wait, really? The AS220? And it's like, we take it for granted because it's here, and it's just like, you know, whatever. But outside of here, it comes attached to it, that reputation, which is important to the city. So they're always my first step when I'm booking a show. Like, they get the first email, and if the date's not available, then I go from there. But they're always the first step.
Cool. Where have you recorded in Rhode Island?
I recorded a couple things at, this is going to sound confusing because it's the same name as a venue currently, the Parlor. Um, so
That's
Aaron,
actually 2.
oh, right. Sorry. The one with the U.
Yeah.
So, Aaron and Rob, who own the parlor, the bar,
Yeah.
used to own a recording studio over by Jam Stage. The jesuscentric record was recorded there. They recorded a bunch of like interesting records that I didn't even know, but I'll see in like the liner notes. Like
Yeah.
the Made in Mexico Athletic Automaton split, like
Okay.
was recorded there, I guess.
Yeah.
So jesuscentric recorded there, and Weak Teeth recorded there for the first LP, and I think they're 7-inch, and then I think some side stuff for the Best Practices LP was
Okay.
recorded there. I think like some extra vocal stuff.
Yeah.
I recorded at the previous Machines with Magnets spot when he was in East Providence.
Okay.
Matches and Heroin recorded there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Alpha Owl recorded at Lupine Studios, which at the time was in Pawtucket, but I think that has moved now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Chasing mist until the end, facing down all over again, standing ground on a fading west, while falling down on a fatal rest.
So I know in addition to record label and shows you book and everything like that, you run a print shop. So you print a lot of these jackets for bands and do shirts and stuff like that. Can you talk about how that came about?
Sure. So I've always done like minor printing, like in basements of apartments and things like that, of like, just crappy band shirts, and had a lot of friends that ran shops. John Hunter in the Grant, 401 Printing, and there was a shop in Newport that the guitarist from Yavin 5 used to work at, and definitely picked up some tools of the trade. 5 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 5 years ago. No, at this point, more. Because it was around the time of the 10-year anniversary. So it was like 7 years ago. Jeff Novak, who is another drummer locally in a bunch of different bands, currently Darklands, bought a bunch of printing equipment off of a friend of his that was closing like a small garage shop, like just a small like thing he had in his like house garage.
Okay.
And he didn't really have much experience with it other than the fact that he wanted to just print his own band's merch, save money.
Yeah.
Didn't necessarily know what he was doing, not to say I knew what I was doing, because I really didn't. I just had a little bit more experience. And so...
Of like making screens. And,
exactly. Yeah. Like the whole process. So he invited me to kind of be a part of it under the same idea that I would be able to print all the Tor Johnson stuff and I would be able to print my band stuff. And it sort of started as just a vehicle for us to be able to print our own stuff.
Okay.
And we were both like teaching each other and learning like from each other, trial and error sort of ways. Since then, as it's like sort of grown, I definitely have pushed it into being more of a business where I've taken on a lot of jobs from local bands and local artists. And when it first started, I would get some occasionally because people found out I had a shop. And recently, in the past probably 2 years, but really hardcore in the past like 6 months, I've been pushing it to be more of a legitimate business, like more of a thing that, hopefully eventually I'll be able to work less.
Yeah.
And do that more.
Yeah.
So it's turned into like a second like real job, where the label has always been a job, but it's more of a hobby. Like, I'm not making any money off of it. It's like for pleasure that I put out records.
Yeah.
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 So yeah.
Can you list the things that you do at?
Sure.
We should probably also tell people the name of the shop.
Right, probably. It's called Teeth Like Swords, which, like Cyttorak, we're going to get real nerdy for a second. If you've read The Hobbit, when they are describing Smaug, the dragon, his teeth are like swords. And our logo is actually within some of the hardcover Hobbit versions, like one that I own. There is a map in the like back cover, like inside the cover, and on the mountain where Smaug lives is a depiction of a dragon, like very crudely drawn, and that is our logo. Is actually the dragon of Smaug.
Cool.
Yeah, because we're nerds. Why not? But yeah, we do any sort of fabric stuff, so shirts, hoodies, things like that. We do posters, we do record jackets, we've done CD packaging, we've done all sorts of weird things, like we did wrist and headbands, like sweatbands for Poco Loco.
Okay.
Mostly because they decided they wanted them for the summer in the truck.
Yeah.
But then they sold them too, or like gave them away. So we've done a lot of cool, like, random things.
Yeah.
We've silk screened B-sides of records, ones that I've put out, but then also ones other people have put out. I still use it as a vehicle for the label, so every test press that I put out gets alternate packaging. Like, so for the 5 test presses you get, I silk screen 5 record jackets of like something weird, some like alternate packaging.
Yep.
I do recycled LP jacket flyers now. Like for myself for shows, like I'll take an LP jacket because there's always an overrun when you order records. Like hypothetically, you get 500 records, okay, and you order your 500 jackets, you probably end up with 550 to 600. It's just how it works. You always get extra. There's just always an overrun, and that's just like something that exists within the record industry. And it's helpful if hypothetically you were to do a repress, then like you have some record sleeves. But most of the time those record sleeves just sit around and really have no use. So I've started cutting them in half and flipping them because you have a white inside. Yep. And using them for show flyers.
Oh, cool.
So instead of just printing a 8x10 at Kinko's, you now have a 12x12 square silk screen, like a one color flyer onto it, and now it's something more eye catching at shows, or like for shows. So started doing that happily. For anyone local that's listening, I offer that for $1 a piece, minimum of 20. Hit me up.
Cool.
But yeah, it's been fun. It's definitely an interesting process, an interesting thing. And now, like, going out and trying to actually find like more customers and trying to make it like a bigger thing. Jeff and I have been contemplating moving into a bigger space so we can get newer equipment, things like that.
Oh, that's great. It's growing that way.
Yeah, trying anyway.
Yeah. Looking at everything that you've done, from playing in bands and running the label and booking shows, like, is there something that you've kind of look at in your career that you're proudest of? Was it?
Yeah, sure. I feel like best practices went the furthest. Jesus-centric toured the most, but best practices probably got the biggest reaction. We were able to get on a label not locally. We played Fest in Gainesville twice, got asked to play that. Played a fest called I Got Brains in Virginia. Yeah, I'd say best practices. It's also the most out of my wheelhouse in terms of playing.
Okay.
I had never really played music like that before, and while I enjoy listening to it, it was interesting on that end and sort of pushed me musically
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Yeah.
From a label end, getting asked to do an interview with Razor Cake and having it be like a 4 or 5 page spread, and then they even did like an online additional supplement.
Yeah.
Like that was huge because like that's now really the only ongoing print zine that's still going.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now that Maximum Rock and Roll closed down, like Razor Cake's probably it.
Yeah.
The label has brought about a bunch of like weird interactions just having like sort of existed, if that makes sense. One of the most interesting ones was many, many years ago at this point, probably at least 10. I got an email from a .gov email address, which, not that that scared me, but I'll be transparent about that. The record label doesn't exist in the government's eyes.
Okay.
It is not a real business.
Yeah.
It is purely a hobby because it's not like I make money.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I never bothered making it like legit.
Yeah, like a LLC company.
Yeah, like it's not real. Like it's just me spending money on records and then them sitting around. No,
Yeah.
So it was a guy who worked on Ellis Island, and apparently every Halloween they show a movie featuring actors that pass through Ellis Island, and it's like a big gala. It's like a big thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that like you have to get tickets and like invited to, and it's like, so they were showing Plan 9 from Outer Space,
Yeah.
which has 3 actors that pass through Ellis Island, one of which being Tor Johnson.
Okay.
And so they were reaching out to me to send stuff so they could make a Tor Johnson display, and they wanted to include Tor Johnson Records stuff in the display.
Okay.
Just because like the name is attached.
Yeah.
And like I'm like
That Tor Johnson, the actor,
right,
had inspired the name for this label.
Right. And so I kept being like, dude, you don't want to do that. We're a shitty punk label. Like, why do you want us to be a part of this like big deal? Like, so eventually I sent them like a T-shirt and like a couple records.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, it was like they sent pictures and it was like a really nice display, and
That's
it was
really
like
cool.
kind of weird. Like I've been interviewed in like horror magazines for like just the name of the label. Like, I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah.
When you compile it all and like look back on it all, it's like, wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Well, cool, Paul. Thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.